All right, everyone, we are live. Had a little last minute adjustment to my camera. So tonight we're going to go ahead and try having the camera a little bit closer so you guys can see a little bit more of the detail. So welcome to the third stream of Party Bear Minis. We are going to be, for those of you who have not joined in the previous streams, we're going to be talking some tabletop, mostly role-playing games. We're going to be painting some miniatures. In this case, we are going to be working on our continuation of Hall of the Orc King by Steamforged Games. If you haven't checked out their Epic Encounters line, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic product. It's great value for money. The sculpts are great. The Frost Giant specifically is a thing of beauty, and the new goblins they came out with are chef's kiss. So today we're going to continue with our kind of tutorial slash workflow speed painting technique. I got these 4 dudes. We're only going to paint 4 miniatures today, but I do think this is the most ambitious goal I have set for a stream yet, as these are the orcs riding the polar bears that I have been so looking forward to doing. I've got them all primed. I've got them based. And then we are also going to be talking RPGs. So tonight we're going to be, for my topic, I kind of figured we'll talk about a little bit of world building. For those of you who like making your own worlds instead of running the pre-made stuff. We have all of the equipment we need. We have our brushes. We have all the paints we need. Got the miniatures. I have my wet palette. I have my water pot over here. My cutting mat, which is going to help me keep an eye on what is in frame and in shot and what is not. And paper towel. The fan that I had, the little battery-powered one, died, so instead we're going to be hopping into a much, much bigger version. And let's hope that doesn't mess me up too badly. This one's powered by my cordless drill battery, so we normally use it on art shows for my fiance to stay a little bit cool in this Florida summer. So let's go ahead and get... Oh, and how can I forget? We have the most important painting supply, Scotch. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we're going to be starting. Looks like we only have King Consom, or however you pronounce that, in the chat room right now. So how's it going, my friend? Probably this weekend I'm going to get all my previous broadcasts put up into YouTube for people, because I've been getting a couple people requesting. And yeah, let's go ahead and take a look and see what is going on. So for these, I'm going to start out a little bit differently than I have the past couple. Because these bears are such a big part of the miniature, we're actually going to go and start out on them instead of starting with the orcs. So for that, we're going to go and bring up our Polished Bone by Reaper. And we're going to need to use quite a bit of this because it's going to cover the entirety of the bears for the most part. Now, we're also going to get a really good look at the different... what's it called? We're going to get a really good look at the detail level on these things. I have looked through the bears, but I haven't really super gone into them. Now, because we're doing a base coat on a large area, we're going to use a big honking brush. Oh, Zane, how's it going? All right, yeah, you identified yourself in chat, so I don't have a problem saying. Thank you for joining me here, my friend. It's good to, nice to know that everyone is supporting me on this. I really can't thank people enough. It's been fantastic, and the outpouring of support I've gotten from people. All right, I'm going to have to move this back just to go ahead and actually get how I paint into the shot. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for joining us, my friend. It's going to be a fun time. You can stick around as long as you want. You can hop in, hop out. Feel free to chat in the chat as much as you want. And since Zane is here, Zane is one of the mods for my Dungeons & Dragons miniatures painting group. So if you have interest in painting for tabletop role-playing games, go ahead and give us a join. I mean, we talk miniatures, we encourage new people. There's a lot of techniques, a lot of people sharing their work. There's a whole lot of recommendations for where did you get that miniature. So if you need a source for good D&D minis, that is a great place too. That is Dungeons & Dragons Miniatures Painting on Facebook. We got 6,500 people now. We got a really good and really competent moderation squad. And we have members all around the world. Recently, and how I actually wound up finding out about this particular line with the Epic Encounters was from when Steamforged Games actually approached us to sponsor a painting contest. And they were kind enough to donate some product to the winners and get it shipped to them. So we have two of our group members wound up getting a free copy of Shrine of the Kobold Queen, as well as the Lair of the Red Dragon. So some really good kobolds and really, really cool looking big old dragon. So anyway, not quite sure if there are more people yet coming in. Nope, still pretty empty in here. But I'm still going to keep blathering on and talking, because from what I understand, silence is the death of streams. So let's go and talk world building. Now, if you are a game master in any way, shape, or form, at some point you're going to wind up doing some world building. Even if you are using a completely pre-made setting and you never deviate from the Forgotten Realms, at some point you're going to have to do a little bit of world building. It's just the nature of the beast. If you play long enough, you're going to have to come up with your own stuff. Let's go ahead and take a drink. Oh yeah, scotch. So from a personal standpoint, I, as a general rule, prefer running my own settings. I like it for a lot of reasons. It provides me with all the creativity, the creative control I need, and I'm not going to run into any canon lawyers amongst my friends. I typically won't to begin with, but I like the idea of just being the genesis of that setting. And there is for the most part, when it comes to like role-playing games, there's really two different attitudes towards world building. There are the people who will go ahead and start out with their creation myth and their gods and the world map and ancient empires and the capital and all that kind of stuff. That's referred to as a top-down world building. I like to go the other direction. Oh yeah, it's So King Consome is commenting that he's the same way, likes running his own stuff, and you get a nice ownership of it. And I think that's the thing that I like the most of it. And if you keep your notes, you can keep using the same world over and over again and keep building on it, which is real nice. So, bottom-up world building. This is kind of what I prefer. Bottom-up world building is when you go ahead and start small. You build a town or a village or a single dungeon, maybe an outpost or a fort. And then you just build out from there. A lot of times, where people will want to know some of the really big, like, well, what are the major powers? What are all that kind of stuff? And quite frankly, for the most part, you don't really need to know that at the beginning of the campaign. I mean, if you're probably not going to go to the Great City anytime in the first 10 levels, then there's no reason to come up with a map and spend your creative time. Ah, crap, am I getting a clog? Please don't tell me I have a clog already. No, I have a clog in my paint. And of course I didn't set aside my paperclip this time. Oh well, I'll figure it out. Yeah, it's King Consum, using Forgotten Realms locations, but running his own stuff. Yeah, I mean, even if you're using a setting and you just run your own adventures, you are technically engaging in world building in some way, shape, or form. So normally, what I like to do when I'm creating a setting is I will typically start out not with a dungeon. Really what I start out with is a concept. I want a good general idea of what type of game I'm going to be running. Now, because I tend to run Savage Worlds, I have a very wide variety of setting options available for me. So that's when I'll go ahead and pick, like, is it modern? Is it like heroic fantasy? Is it a different world? Is it our world? All that kind of stuff. And I will go ahead and start moving from there. So let's go and say we were starting with a D&D setting. Like we're going to do basic D&D, pretty traditional D&D. In that case, I'll go ahead and roughly define the area that you're in, like the province or the territory or whatever you want to call it. You know, something like Icewind Dale in the Forgotten Realms. That was really my first experience with Forgotten Realms, was dealing with the Crystal Shard trilogy, and the Drizzt Do'Urden stuff. So I still kind of think as Icewind Dale is almost like classic Forgotten Realms, even though I know it's really not. Probably that's Waterdeep. But that'll be so I'll start out with just get a general idea of where we are. Like, let's go and say we are in some area in the Borderlands. We'll call it I don't know, the Red Mist Valley. Just come up with a random name. Well, that'll go and give us a little bit of information. Mostly, we're going to need a village. And a lot of times I'll name a village after a person, like I'll call it Grohl's Ferry or Grohl's something. Populate it with a couple of important non-player characters that your PCs are likely to deal with. Weaponsmith, armorsmith, if there is one in town. Innkeeper, absolutely. Somebody selling general goods or at a store. Local temple, the very, very basic stuff. Just come up with a couple NPCs, nothing really major. And then go ahead and run an adventure in here. Now, the other thing I like doing is when I'm starting to fill out the area, and as the player characters finish the first adventure and then need to start expanding out, that's when I'll start building up into the world out there. Kind of build it as you go. You're building that plane in mid-flight, which doesn't necessarily seem like a good idea, but you'd be surprised. That way, if the campaign falls through and people's schedules just stop it from happening, you haven't really spent a lot of creative time on this whole big world that nobody's ever going to use. So this kind of works with a really basic, fundamental, functional work level. And I'm really big on functionality in case you can't tell. Okay, well, you can see in these minis that this is a really, really sloppy paint job. This is a base coat, so jumping back into the painting end of things. If you are doing base coats like this and you're being neat and tidy, I'm sorry, that's one of the few times I'm going to tell you you're doing it wrong. Don't use a small brush. Don't be neat and tidy. Be sloppy. There's no incentive to be neat. The only thing that being neat will do at this phase is take more time for absolutely no benefit. If you're taking time and you're getting a better result out of it, then that's just how much time do you want to spend to get that result. And everybody puts that needle at a different place. Now, these guys probably should have gotten painted before they went on their bases, but I made a mistake because I wanted them to look good for photographs. So I'm sorry about that. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step of bottom-up world building. While we go ahead and enjoy our drink. Yes, it is a good thing to know before priming, before priming a bunch of minis, is knowing which ones you want to prime on their bases and which ones you want to prime off. I will tend to prime on the base even if I really shouldn't, just so I can have something to grip. Those of you who have been paying attention to my previous streams might notice that I am not using my paint handles today. It's because these guys are on big old honking 50mm bases and they don't fit. So that's one thing. Now we're going to go ahead and do a second coat on this so we get this off-white nice and smooth. Second coat should go by faster because we're really just making sure that we're not having too much of that black primer showing underneath. So getting back to world building on the bottom-up approach. One thing that you can do when you're making your village or town or you're starting your adventure, I'm not necessarily going to recommend having a session 0 with your players, but go ahead and ask them, find ways to incorporate their characters' backstories into this area. Like from the very get-go. Don't go ahead and think of it as, well, later on down the line when they get to the Grand Capital, you'll run into the blacksmith that Throg the Barbarian grew up with, or anything like that. No, start it from the very beginning. Find a reason and a good emotional hook for your player characters to be in this village, on these hinterlands, or wherever it is you're starting. If you're starting in a big city, just this neighborhood, or this district, or this dockside, or whatever it is wherever it is you're starting in. And then, if you want to have a lot of fun and really get your players involved, go ahead and ask them questions about the setting and have them determine them. Like, you can go ahead and ask your characters beforehand, give me some rumors about the local area. I'm sorry about that. I don't understand why I'm receiving work calls. I should be off. They shouldn't be coming to me. But I'm not answering them anyway because I am not at work. But yeah, ask your players about some rumors. Maybe the name of a dungeon or an inn or maybe even another town in this area. Don't be afraid to have them start doing fundamental fundamental world building for you. D&D is a collaborative storytelling experience. Most role-playing games are. Some really kind of hold on to that. Like if your character is playing one of my favorites is your character playing a cleric, and they say what gods are available. Well, if you haven't gotten to that point yet, go ahead and say I haven't gotten to that point. What god would you like to worship? And actually have them create their own god. So it works perfectly within their character. All right. So now that we've got that, see we've got that nice even coat of the off-white. Now we'll go ahead and start on the skin. King Kunsam is lagging a little bit, and I'm not surprised. Twitch does have a delay, and it looks like L West UCF has joined us. We got another viewer in here as well, but they're not popping up on the list. Yeah, so we're going to go and hop onto the orc skin. So we're going to have Snow Shadow. Don't need too much. Actually, we're going to put a fair bit of this on because I'm going to do something a little bit weird, a little bit different on this. I'm going to cheat a little bit on my goal. So yeah, go ahead and ask your players. Now, one of the keys about doing this is that some players really like to be involved, and some players don't, and both are perfectly fine. If your players, if you have one or two people who are more either they're new or they're more of a spectator type player, because I've had plenty of people who have joined my table who all they want to do is sit down, be part of the group, and pretty much observe everybody else doing their thing. This is perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with this. They're playing the game and they're enjoying themselves as much as anybody else. I mean, think about it. If these games were movies, if Star Wars was a role-playing game, how much time do you really think Chewbacca's player, spent on dialogue? I mean, yeah, everybody loves Chewie, but really, how much did Chewie do in the movies? Not that much. And most likely, that's a player who's just more of a spectator type player. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and apply this Snow Shadow to all the skin. And they're not going to be wearing gloves because they are big, tough frost orcs. They don't have a lot of skin showing, so this stuff should go by relatively quick up until I get to the next point of where I'm actually kind of cheating on this project. And you'll see why. So, side thing that I do recommend, and I know I've mentioned it before, if you are doing a lot of painting, batch painting like this, go and have a side project nearby so that if you just have a little bit of extra paint, you can use it. Or if you need time for stuff to dry, you can go and do that. Like right now, I am going to have to do a second coat of the Snow Shadow on this skin, but I'm going to have to let the skin dry first, and because it's just such a tiny area, it's going to go by so quick, I'm going to have to go and hop onto something else. So, yeah, clerics, have them make their own god. Warlocks, have them make their own patron. If they want to be like a fiend-packed warlock, which is kind of the stereotypical, like, made a deal with a demon or a devil for a power, have them make that demon or devil. And in fact, have it be as important or as unimportant as they want it to be. This will make people a lot more invested in the setting, and they'll have a lot more buy-in if they do that. Now, this is how I am cheating on this project. We're going to pull out that big honking brush again, and this right here is a Blood Bowl troll from Forge World. Then I'm going to be, I'm not going to say painting at the same time, but I'm going to go and use up some of the Snow Shadow on him. But yeah, go ahead and, if your players are more of a spectator types, don't force it. I mean, only have people contribute what they want to. If they don't want to contribute, or they don't feel like it, or they just don't feel up for it, or they don't have ideas, don't force them. I mean, it's, you're all here to have fun. It's kind of like why I don't mandate a giant thing of backstory for my players. Just a lot of people don't enjoy doing that. I don't have a problem if somebody gives me a couple pages. In fact, I can work with that, but I don't need. I'm not going to mandate it. Just as much as you give me, as much as you want to give me. So once you go ahead and build this town, and you have your player characters who are introducing stuff, that's when you can start moving out. And after the first time, go ahead and figure out a couple of plot hooks, a couple of directions that they could potentially head in. And it could be like, we find a treasure map, as well as the miner's daughter who is trying to get to point to the biggest town in this area. It could be something really simple like that. And just every single time, kind of like build the world in front of them. But keep your notes. Because that way, if this campaign falls through, or just finishes, you still have those notes. And now this area can just be part of your adventuring world. So that's the basis of bottom-up world building. Where this becomes a little bit more challenging is when you want to start building a world that feels real. And this is where the challenges of world building really start coming into play. And this is probably what the bulk of this is going to be, and I'm going to compare a lot of stuff to bottom-up world building. So let's go and say you went ahead and designed this town. Towns don't exist for no reason. Now, I am going to use the term realism throughout this discussion, even though you have to understand that I'm not referring to it as realism in the same sense that we're thinking of it. This is like we're talking about fantasy role-playing games. Magic and dragons exist. So you don't have to be terribly realistic in that regard. This is more so about a concept of consistency and how there are some things that just work a certain way and we have difficulty thinking of it not working in that way. Like, for instance, I'm assuming in whatever world you're playing, gravity still works. People still need to eat. Everybody is born with skin. I know that these seem like rather extreme examples, but that kind of stuff is going to stick around because it's kind of difficult for us to think of stuff that's not like that. And we are going to naturally put a lot of our biases and ideas into a story, whether we realize it or not. And it's managing those biases and ideas that's going to basically make your world feel real. And that's the important thing. You want it to feel like it's real. So how do we do this? That gets a little bit complicated. Let's go and take a look at our town. Let's go and call it like we're going to go and put this area. It's called it's in a region called, let's say, the Red Mist Valley. This is already telling us that there's some sort of red mist here, or in the past was, because a lot of times places are named after historical events. It's also a valley, which means that there's mountains on either side. Okay, that helps us. That helps us geography, but not necessarily a bunch of other stuff. Let's go and take this town. Why is this town here? What purpose does this town serve? This is a really good point to start building this town. Is it on a river? If it's on a river, then probably it may be a way station for people traveling along that river. Rivers were hubs of commerce historically. If it's on a major road, that could be the same case. If it's just kind of in the middle of nowhere, now you really need to think about why is this thing here and how is that going to influence the people? So let's go say it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like far away from the beaten path. It's just kind of like this isolated town. How do these people survive? Do they just rip all their food up out of the ground? Are there farms nearby? Are there people constantly going back to town to get to the main road to get food? For that matter, if they are, why are they doing that? What is the purpose of them doing that? Let's go and take a look. Looks like we are dry. Good. So we're going to hop back into minis real quick, and then we're going to keep talking about that town. Because we have to do this bear a little bit separately, we can't necessarily do these guys exactly like before. Oh, hello, Sanctum Seraph. You refer to me as a handsome bearded devil, so I'm assuming that I know you in some shape, way, or form. But thank you very much for joining us. We are talking world building, and we are painting some minis. So, whenever you make a town, especially this first town, go and think of a reason why it exists. I once heard an acronym that you need to understand that in order to really understand why a town or a settlement exists, there are basically 5 different factors you have to bring in. The socially, why does this exist? People will congregate for safety, but they'll also congregate for economics, for like-mindedness, all that kind of stuff. Think about the social. Oh, by the way, this is Seraphim sepia that we're applying to that polished bone to give it a little bit of more yellowish brown. And that's how we're going to start on these polar bears. Because if you ever pay attention to polar bears, they do have a little bit of a yellowish brownish tinge to them. They're not just pure white. So the next one is political. Whenever people gather, you're talking about a natural concentration of power. Some form of politics is going to arrive. Now, this could be something as simple as just the farmer with the most land, or some sort of leader pops up, like a tribal leader. Maybe it's like a company boss at a mining town. Maybe it is the local church basically runs things. Maybe it's an artisans guild. Maybe it is a representative of the king or queen or some distant regent. The politics of this place, whenever two or more people gather, politics happens. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. This doesn't mean backstabbing and that kind of stuff. It just means that this is society. When there's society happening, people naturally have to agree on stuff instead. Policy, hence politics. Let's go and make sure we get all of this area. Come on, Andrew, you can do this. You do this, party bear. Yeah, drop in my brush. All right, and I think I got a little bit of white paint on there. Oh, I didn't. So social and political. Next one is economical. So although it may sound like a really boring field of study, everything is economics. Economics is everything. Money in the distribution of resources is one of the single most important factors of society since people first settled in mud huts. There has to be an economic reason for this place to exist. There needs to be an economic lifeblood. There needs to be money, goods, something flowing in to feed the people and deal with the scarcity of any given good that is needed. There has to be an industry in some way, shape, or form. This is what I'm talking about. Why does this place exist? If the place doesn't produce anything, then naturally there's just not going to be that many people there. The next one is religious. Now, religious, I've also heard, could be referred to as cultural. And I think cultural might fit a little bit better. But go ahead and think of where this religion falls in. And don't just think, what god do they worship? Because realistically, if you're talking about a polytheistic or a henotheistic society, people are probably going to be worshiping multiple different gods. If it's a monotheistic society and it's an actual religion, and we'll go and get on religion sometime later, please be careful. Religion is complicated. These types of things historically will wind up deriving a lot of cultural festivities, attitudes, morality, that kind of stuff. Even now, most of our morals and ethics are based off, or at least in this country, at least in the United States, are still based off of a Judeo-Christian ethic. There has been some removal from that in some social sense, but largely we still, believe in a system that is just very heavily influenced by that. The last one is military. This could be something as simple as there are literally peasants who will pick up their pitchforks and defend the place against orcs if need be. But a place without any military protection is not going to last very long, especially in a dangerous world like most D&D settings. By the way, if your D&D setting isn't dangerous, I question what kind of game you're playing, because that doesn't feel like D&D. Last I checked, the world of D&D is a very dangerous place. And if you paid attention, yes, that acronym does wind up spelling sperm. It's unfortunate, but it fits. So if you have, like we're sitting here talking, a really, really isolated town, there's got to be a reason why this place exists. Why is it that in the middle of nowhere, you have a bunch of people living? Well, let's go and take a look at what's around it. So somebody in chat, we've got this village we're building. What is there, what kind of terrain and topography is nearby? Somebody in chat, anybody. There's 3 of you. I know you can talk. Are we by a forest? Are we by a mountain? Are we by wetlands and swamp? Are we in the middle of the desert? I will give you until the end of me putting this wash on this polar bear to answer me. Answer me! Maybe I should have given you longer. This was pretty quick. All right, so let's go and say that it's kind of stereotypical D&D, and you're in one of those. Oh, deserts. There you go. Okay, perfect. You like deserts. So let's go and say that the Red Mist Valley, it is a natural desert. Oh, you like desserts, not desert. Okay, well, man, this isn't Candyland. Although it could be. I don't know. So, but let's go and say that the Red Mist Valley goes ahead and actually makes kind of like a southwestern, like Arizona style, like bedrock gulch type thing, like you would wind up seeing in a western. So if this place is kind of in the middle of there, maybe it is really a mining camp. Yeah, you like turtles. Everybody likes turtles. So it could be a mining camp. There could be some sort of special resource in the ground that people need. And now we're actually getting to a potentially very interesting bit of world building. Let's talk about special resources. If any of you have read Dune, the spice is perfect. Yeah, dig it. I love it. Yeah, you love Arizona. I honestly think that more fantasy settings should be based out of the United States Southwest. Arizona, New Mexico, it is beautiful territory. I mean, it's not quite scrubland. It's definitely desert, but a lot of times you get this really rocky area, and the topography is much more varied than people realize. There was I actually did a lot of work on doing a kind of like a sandboxy Savage Worlds region-locked campaign in a fantasy world based on the big national park in Arizona. King Kazam says the only source of water in the area. Well, now that is a possibility. And we will actually put a pin in that because I like that idea, and that's a really good example of world building that you can do because water is extremely important for life. Like a big well or an underground lake. I do like where your head's at. So if you are in an area like a desert and you only have a single source of water, like a big well or an underground lake, that area is by nature going to attract a ton of people in the area, most of the people in the area. And that's a perfect spot for something like an area capital or one of the big towns in the area. That is a great idea, and we may wind up using that for something a little bit further, maybe like the main like central hub for this area, but not necessarily this one in the middle of nowhere. Water is good, but maybe it is maybe it's a place kind of like a little bit of a western boomtown where there was a gold strike that was found, or you can make some sort of magical wonder material that people go ahead and dig up here, but because the area is inhospitable, then they have to go bring it back to the main area where there's a really big underground lake that effectively forms a great big cistern. By the way, we are moving into some leather areas, so we're going to pull up Reaper Saddle Brown. I'm going to start painting that. Now we've got like a fringe here, and there's a little bit of wash still wet, but I think we should be fine. It's dry enough. So yeah, most of like what I'm talking here at this point really just winds up being world building as a thought experiment. And this is a good thing to do, to just periodically think, okay, why would things be here? How would they go? Does this make sense? Because eventually, people are naturally going to ask that. And if you have a lot of adventures in areas in the middle of nowhere that have no reason to exist, your players are going to start questioning it, and they're going to start thinking something's wrong. And that's actually a good way to make things seem sinister. Especially if you're following all this stuff, then all of a sudden you have like a town full of Ozark hillbillies that are living in the middle of nowhere for no goddamn reason. People are immediately going to think that there is something hinky going on there, and there better be something hinky going on there. And hell, it's D&D. There better be something hinky going on anywhere. So let's go and say for this one that they're miners. They're digging some sort of universe-specific MacGuffin out of the ground. Maybe we can just say it's gold, but let's be a little bit more interesting than that. This is D&D, right? Gold is pedestrian. They dig the stuff out of the ground. And let's go and say it is it's used in magic in some way, shape, or form. Maybe like the construction of magic items, which in and of itself is a really specialized thing. So it makes sense that this stuff is difficult to get a hold of. Probably fetches a pretty fair price, but buyers are not very common. So it would need to go to a very large metropolitan area in order to get sold. But around here, people trade it like it's nothing because they can get a lot of it. That can be a nice little disconcerting thing for your player characters when they walk into a tavern and people are sitting there playing cards and dice, and they're basically tossing around sections of these nuggets of magical item crafting gear that cost thousands and thousands of gold pieces elsewhere, but here they're just treating it like it's Monopoly money. That'll be a nice little jarring thing to make add a little bit of culture. And on top of that, that place with the big underground lake, it's the only main source of water in the area, can charge whatever they damn well please to this little village. So now we have an interesting little economic thing happening with possible conflict. That maybe the big town is keeping these little ones poor in order to fill their own coffers. Okay, well, if we got that idea, mostly poor miners who can't really tap into the money that they have because there's no buyers for it. Now we're starting to get a little bit of a feel for this little village you had. So why would the adventurers need to be there? Why would the adventurers be there to begin with? Well, maybe they were sent by this trade consortium or this trading guild to go and find out why the supply of this earth elemental stuff has dried up. Maybe the mine is haunted. Maybe there's a monster in there that the PCs have to go take care of. Maybe that they're sick and tired of being poor and they want a bigger cut and they're on strike and the PCs have been sent to convince them otherwise. And because the big city has the source of water, at any time they can just cut that off. Now they probably don't want to do this because it's going to be, create a lot of problems, but that can always be in the cards. And imagine if your player characters start thinking that the miners are the ones who need to be sided with. And now they got to start having to worry about the water that they have. That can also lead to some very interesting stories. So right here, we've already taken this place and differentiated it from the rest of what you'll see in D&D. It's not, oh, here's a farming town where goblins have kidnapped the blacksmith's daughter. It's not your stereotypical D&D anymore. Now things are getting a little bit interesting. And then the real fun with world building continues. Now you can start taking a look at, well, if that works this way, then what about this? Well, if this works this way, then what about this? I had a friend of mine describe that one of the best things you can do when it comes to world building and building societies is to go ahead and answer, what do they do with their trash? This reveals a lot about a culture of what they do with their waste and what do they consider waste. So if you're in the middle of a desert, in all due likelihood, they can probably just bury it or burn it or something along those lines. But, surely that can wind up having consequences in some way, shape, or form. I'm pretty sure that any of the local wildlife wouldn't be okay with this. If anything lives underground, they probably wouldn't be liking it very much. Ah, man, that's good. All right, so what are we doing next on these guys? Let's go ahead and take care of the blue stuff. So I'm going to go and pull out my Glacier Blue. So right here, with just a little bit of thought, we presented some interesting concepts for a game and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily see most of the time. So let's go ahead and take a look at that acronym again. Let's go ahead and take socially. Like, we kind of started up with this area as being like an economically. Economically, it exists because it's a mining hub. they're pulling this elemental earth, whiskey or bourbon. What are we drinking though? Whiskey or bourbon? We're drinking scotch. Normally when I paint, why not both? Yes. I don't, unfortunately, pardon me, unfortunately, I don't have any bourbon on me right now, and I don't have too much scotch left. I would personally love to go ahead and start in with the George Thorogood and go ahead and be enjoying one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer. But we're not there right now. Let's go ahead and soak up some of this wash that we have around his feet. One of the things to keep an eye out for is washes are ruled by gravity. So I think we're going to put a little bit more of this ice blue on these guys too. Yeah, if it gets too loud, by the way, let me know. My fiance is playing Just Dance in the other room, so if you guys can hear that, let me know. She told me that I could text her and she'd turn it down, but I think she's probably okay. So right there, we have conflict, and conflict is the center of stories. That is the central thing. That's probably the most important thing you can have. Without conflict, there is no story. So we've got the economic stuff, and that's really what we're basing this stuff off of. So for this town, socially, what is this place going to be like socially? Well, they're isolated. They're completely dependent for life on somebody else, on whatever this big town is. We'll go ahead and call them like the water traders. They're completely dependent on these water traders. And they probably know that what they have is worth a lot of money. This elemental earth is worth a ton of money on the open market, but it's not worth a lot here. And they probably know that this water consortium, the water traders, are making bank and living it up. And let's go ahead and think that for these people who rarely go to the big town, to the big main trading hub, they probably think that they are living it up and living a wonderful life while they have this miserable, hard scrabble existence that they're working their ass off, eking out a living. Now, that may or may not be true. You could go ahead and it could be the case. They could be living it up and living like kings in the main town, or they could also be struggling real bad too because they're missing some other thing. Like they got plenty of water, but do they have a lot of food? Maybe they are getting all this money because they're having to pay tribute to a dragon or something like that. Any number of things. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe they are living better, but that living better comes with strings. It's a good idea to think about that. But go ahead and think, at least for the small town where we're starting, what does that make this place like? What does that make these people like? What does that make them think? They're probably going to be very resentful of those, what's it called? They're probably going to be very, very resentful and probably going to be hesitant to help a lot of outsiders because most of the outsiders they see and most of the people coming in, they're not coming in to help, they're coming in to maintain quotas. They're coming in to, take this elemental earth and leave them with the bare minimum of water they need to live. So they're probably going to be distrustful of outsiders. They're probably going to be resentful of the city folk. Now, we've named a couple of negative qualities that's going to make life for the PCs difficult, but people are complicated and people are rarely all good and all bad. That kind of stuff just doesn't feel right. So go ahead and think of also some positive things. I mean, maybe they're obviously they're going to be a pretty hardworking and resilient people, but maybe they have as resentful as they are towards the city dwellers, maybe they have they've developed a bit of a gallows humor culture. Maybe it's they see a lot of people come and go, so the people who are there for long term become real tight knit. Maybe they're a very communal based thing. Maybe they don't even bother separating the water from person to person. Maybe they just put it all in a general pot and then ration it off to people as they need it. You can go ahead and add these nice little more positive qualities too to add in with all of the anger and resentment and distrust that they have. Maybe they're hesitant to trust outsiders, but once you earn their trust, that they're the type of people that'll go to the mattresses for you. So that's social, political. Let's go and think about the politics of this place. Who's in charge of it? I mean, I would think that with what we're describing, there would probably be a representative of the water traders there just to go and keep the quotas high and keep them producing. But if they are really distrustful of outsiders and they're that resentful, I get the idea that that would kind of be a rotating position. I don't think people would really want to stay there for very long if they're constantly getting sideways glances and everybody hates them. And can you imagine being at a workplace where everybody hates you? It sounds miserable. Probably not going to want to stick around for very long, especially if you have other options. So either we can have somebody who, quite frankly, doesn't have other options, or keep it as literally there's a rotating group and there's somebody else who's really in charge. Now, if that's the case, the person really in charge could be an elected mayor. They could be maybe just like a lead miner or just somebody who kind of takes the reins and takes control. Harsh taskmaster. Ooh, I like that. I always like that. I always like there to be more conflict in an area. So maybe that there's somebody, maybe they don't get to pool their water. Maybe it's somebody who is keeping an eye on them and only keep giving people exactly what they need to stay in working condition. This can be good because if player characters are sent maybe to take care of a monster or something like that, and they wind up seeing that the way these miners are being treated is miserable because they've got this harsh, stern taskmaster just keeping them all in line, they might not necessarily be too big on the water merchants. So let's go and say that there is a harsh taskmaster. He keeps the place in a bit of an iron grip. I mean, in a big enough area, yeah, if it's a big enough area, there's enough miners, they're going to want to, they're going to naturally have a miner that's just going to basically be the one in charge of them and kind of a natural leader amongst them. Almost like a little bit of a folk hero type deal. If not a folk hero, then just, a first among equals. Okay, so that's the political end of things. Yeah. Harsh taskmaster, like fill up a 50-pound bag of rare stuff for your daily water. Yeah, that's a fantastic thing. And keeping people on that level of almost starvation is a great way to control people. It's a particularly evil way to control people, but it is a way to do it. So for those of you who are just joining, we are painting and talking world building. Looks like we got 5 people on now. Looks like people are trickling in. Adam, thank you for joining us. Pleasure seeing you. I don't know if you're somebody I know personally or if you are somebody joining us from Twitch, but either way, you are welcome to the stream. I'm rambling about world building. We're kind of working out a town for our bottom-up world building area. Bottom-up world building philosophy. Oh god, there's a bunch of wash still went on this one, but I think it'll be okay, especially considering it's just the base. I'm going to be dry brushing the crap over it. Okay, so we've done the political, we've done the economic. So religion and culture. Here's the big question for the religion and culture. Where does this fall into with this particular group? It seems like a really downtrodden, miserable place. This is the type of thing where you could go in a couple different directions. You could be go full Karl Marx and have it be the religion as the opiate of the masses, and believe that the religion is brought there specifically to keep the miners working. Or it could be some sort of local thing that they just find solace in, that maybe they retreat to it and it's how they wind up getting through their days, is some sort of a belief of an eternal reward or some sort of a source of strength. And let's go and think about how this would add to their culture. Like, here is where you start adding a couple little things to these towns that make them feel really interesting. Because culturally, if it's this bad, I mean, are people just drinking themselves to death? Are they engaging in drug use? Is there kind of like an opioid problem here? Because it sounds like a pretty miserable place. People are going to wind up finding some way to escape. So let's go ahead and say that some people have figured out a way to, and let's go ahead and make it fantastic and magical. People found a way to go and distill this elemental earth in with their alcohol, and they're making this extremely potent, very, very dangerous, like almost like a whiskey. So now we have something that realistically, if it was refined a little bit, could wind up even becoming an export of this place, and they could be known for. That is a smoky scotch. All right, well, we are continuing on the painting. I've got one. Let's go on to the gray. We got Reaper, Tempest Gray. Right, so let's go ahead and say that because religion is complicated, let's go and say that there is a local, like maybe a small, like I don't even want to say church or a temple, like almost like just a small shrine that's been set up from like one of your local, maybe like more closer to neutral gods. I don't see this place as being a place to really be too strong on the particularly good gods. Let's go and call him one of the more neutral gods, like maybe like a god of like justice or law, got brought in long time ago in order to help keep the peasants working. Yeah, moonshine time. Yeah, so that's the type of thing, by the way, that happens. Alcohol is considered to be one of the necessary things for societies to exist. Some form of fermentation. It's food preservation as much as anything. But so let's go and say that it's like the lawbringer. We'll go and call him the lawbringer. I like that name. The water merchants brought in a priest of the lawbringer as a way to kind of just keep everybody in line and make them believe that, yeah, by the way, this is the way things are supposed to be. And there's no need to rebel because this is how things are supposed to be. And as long as you follow the law and maintain order, then you'll be rewarded with the law in heaven or after you die, however they want to do it. So they went ahead and brought that. But over time, because we're assuming this has been going on for a while, I mean, I don't think this is like a brand new place. The initial uprisings have been put down. But let's go and say that initially it's supposed to be the god of law, but eventually people start seeing him as being as much about justice as it is about law. And now we have another source of tension. Let's go and say that there is a new priest in town, new priest of the lawbringer, who they're preaching a little bit of a variant thing. Now, this is another thing that you should not be afraid to do in your games that a lot of people seem terrified to do. Religion is complicated. Religion is very complicated. Take a look at Christianity alone. Like if Christianity and D&D was like the worship of the god Pelor, the god of the sun, how many different branches of Christianity are there? There's tons. All of them are saying things slightly or radically different than each other. So there's absolutely no reason why the worshipers of the lawbringer would all agree on one thing that's going on. And so maybe there's a new priest in the area because the old priest, something happened to him. Let's go and have that be part of the inciting incident. Let's go and have that be part of the inciting incident. Something happened in the mine to stop people from going in. They refused to go in, and so the local priest of the lawbringer decided, I'm going to go in there and show them what it means to follow the law. And then he died. There's a monster down there, and he got eaten. So now there's a new priest that's coming in as a replacement, and this one's a little bit younger and has some crazy ideas about the lawbringer not just being about following the rules, but also about the rules being just. So we have one who's a little bit more forward thinking. They released a Balrog. Yeah, they could absolutely have done that. I just so you guys know, I absolutely love the trope of dug too deep. There was a while, and if one of my other friends winds up popping on, there was a while where I was doing a lot of world building and a setting building for basically a fallen dwarven empire, where they literally dug too deep, and now after hundreds and hundreds of years of prepping, they're getting ready to go back in and reclaim the empire under the mountain. And I'd done a ton of world building on it. I think I still might revise it. I might actually just start doing that live, doing thought experiments here, talking about it. I think it'd be a good place to do it. Yeah, maybe they release something down there. And here's the fun part: it doesn't have to be something that the players can necessarily handle. But let's go and say that happened. Let's go and say that's the inciting incident, that the previous priest of the Lawbringer died, and that the player characters are coming in, escorting the new priest here, as well as bringing supplies, and they've been sent to troubleshoot and find out what happened and deal with it. And since this priest now believes more in the Lawbringer as a sense of justice, would probably be absolutely disgusted by this place. So we've got a villain in the form of the Harsh Taskmaster. We've got a villain in the sense of whatever the hell got released down in the mine. We've got a helpful non-player character in the form of the new priest of the Lawbringer. We've got the possibility of a miner who's kind of like first among equals, like an elder, like a village elder. Go ahead and give us a bartender and give us a general store owner so that we have the standard thing. And guess what? You have now a great place with the potential for probably about 4 or 5 sessions worth of really good, solid adventuring and role-playing before you even have to leave this tiny mining town. And the cool thing is, we came up with all that in, just shy of an hour? You can write stuff down and all that kind of stuff and get your game mechanics down for whatever system you're playing. But this is the advantage of bottom-up world building. It's the advantage when you're not sitting there and immediately starting with the top-end stuff. All right, we got some people coming in. Okay, Atten, Bloodluster, C. Marlbore, Commander Root, Cat's Mini Art. Hi, Cat's Mini Art. King Consum, Elwest UCF, and Sanctum Seraph. Well, thank you all for coming. I see a lot of familiar names. I do appreciate you being here. So yeah, we've just created a small town filled with adventure that could probably last you about 4 or 5 good sessions of roleplay before you've kind of resolved stuff enough before the player characters realize, holy crap, we need to go back, or we need to go and call in backup, or we need to go somewhere to get more resources because we just can't handle this by ourselves. Because quite frankly, I like the idea of whatever is down there being something they can't handle by themselves. I won't necessarily jump straight to releasing a Balrog. I'm going to go and say something bigger than what they can deal with. Maybe it's something like here's a good idea. So just that throwaway name we had for the area beforehand, the Red Mist Valley, maybe that's what they found down there, is they actually found the Red Mist. And at this point, we can keep it real mysterious. We don't know what the Red Mist does. All we know is it's some sort of historical thing. It happened a long time ago, and now it's back. The Red Mist has returned to the Red Mist Valley. Why is it called the Red Mist? Maybe it is literally physically red. Maybe it is just something that causes red in people. Maybe it's like some sort of a gas or a thing that just causes people to bleed out of orifices that they're not supposed to bleed out of. How about that for properly creepy? It's something, it's completely invisible. The only thing you know is that it's got just the air suddenly smells like copper, and then people around you start bleeding out of their eyes. And whatever it is, the miners found it, and it just is in the mine, and you need to find a way to deal with it. You can investigate a little bit, find out how horrible the conditions are in this mining town. Maybe you can find maybe the PCs find a monster down there that is either a slave or a servant to the Red Mist, or it's generating the Red Mist, or maybe if you've been exposed to the Red Mist for long enough, it turns into you like kind of like a Red Mist zombie. Something like those lines. Go ahead and like if this is going to be an inciting incident / general MacGuffin to be a recurring monster or villain, make it weird, make it mysterious. Go ahead and do something that is not normal that you wouldn't think. So let's go and say it goes ahead and robs you of your mind, makes you super violent, because of course it does, because this is D&D, it's a combat based thing. But the nice thing is that can also lead people to want to wonder, should we be fighting these people who are infected by this? Because at this point, they're kind of victims. That's another thing that I like doing. Carnivorous in nature, leaves only a red mist behind. That's another good idea. Maybe it is something that, some sort of a monster that what it consumes leaves their victims only that like red fog. And people can be breathing it, and later on, like maybe the players just encounter the red mist, and then later on they actually see the red mist being formed, and they realize that beforehand when they were breathing, like when they were breathing in the red mist and they were feeling it, less smelling as foul as it was, that they were actually breathing in the previous victim. And when you get that kind of a realization of people, oh, they're going to be freaked out. Oh, that's good. Okay, so let's go and say then, I like that. It's some sort of subterranean monster, and let's make it intelligent. Let's make it so it doesn't necessarily look intelligent at first, but it winds up being a lot more intelligent than you realize. Problem solving intelligent, raptor intelligent, society building intelligent. Well, eventually, we're going to get to the point where player characters are going to have to go back for resupply, get more information, get back up something along those lines. Probably about 3 or 4 sessions in, and that's when they're going to have to go to that town, to that big town. Well, we're doing bottom-up world building, right? If they're having to go to home base, you're going to want to have that home base made for them. You're going to want to have it be ready. What you can do on this is the entire time you're doing this, you can be coming up with ideas, asking players, what's the name of an inn you like in that town? What's the name of a contact person or a sparring partner or anything like that in this big town? So you can gradually start building this place up and giving it a character. So let's take a look at this big town. Because eventually your player character is going to need there. I think we probably got enough of the basic role building of that small town, that mining camp. Now let's talk about this big town. We got some viewers here. It's a big town. It's in the middle of a desert, kind of like the Red Mist Valley. So it's 2 mountains with just this really dry, arid place. Now it's between 2 mountains, so probably these are going to be like windswept plains. It's going to be dry, hot, cold at night. Excuse me. I love the idea of it being more of like an Arizona Rocky, almost a painted desert type deal. But let's go and head back to town. It's the big town. This is a trading hub. Maybe this is the only source of water in the area. Yeah, we've already decided it's the only source of water in the area, like King Kansan was talking about. We'll say it's an underground lake, because I like that. That way you can basically, that will help keep these water traders in control of the water source, because at this point, water is power. Water is the resource everybody needs. They hold on to it, and they hold on to it with a jealous grip. If they see people drilling wells, they do not take kindly to that. In fact, you can go and say at this point that unlicensed well drilling is punishable by death. And that right there can be where we start the introduction to this town. Unlicensed well drilling is punishable by death. And since these water merchants have already been, we have already seen them not having a problem being very harsh taskmasters. We can go ahead and say that they want to show people what happens if you violate that. And you can go ahead and have the first introduction you have into this town. Obviously, the player characters have been here before, because they came from here, but the players haven't been here yet. So let's go ahead and make their first introduction to this place something that they will remember. How about they go ahead and see on their way in that there is either a body or a person being executed on the walls outside the town. Very much like Game of Thrones, the Wise Masters of Astapor, or whatever it is, where they were sitting there hanging up people on the way in to show their strength. So we've already established the water merchants as being really, really tough characters. And whoever's in charge of them is a bad guy. Very, very bad. And depending on how bad you want to make him, you can go and say that that is how they like to execute these people in the most gruesome way possible. Worse than murder, worse than theft, worse than rape is unlicensed wells, because you are directly attacking the water merchant's power. So they will have somebody on the front, and that is how they execute them, is that they just put you facing the east, because I kind of see this valley being a northwest valley. It's mountains to the north, mountains to the south, so there is constantly a wind blowing to the east, and that is how they like to execute these people who are trying to rob them of their power. They sit there and strap them up to the wall. They crucify them against the wall, and then just let the winds of the desert and the desert sun do its work. And over the course of a day, people are slowly shredded by fine particles of sand as they bake in the heat. And that seems like an awful, awful way to die. And that seems like it would be a good incentive for people to not dig wells. So let's go ahead and do our acronym here again. And we'll be doing this for every single town and settlement that you see. Socially, what is this place like? Well, this is the center of the water merchant's power, so it's probably going to be much more wealthy. It's got to have trade routes to other places, so it's going to be a little bit of a more diverse group. Political, I kind of see these guys as there's like one guy in charge. He rules with an iron fist, and he does not brook challengers to his power. Probably wants everybody to think that he is some sort of a benevolent guy. So we'll go ahead and say that his official title is Lord of Benevolence. That way he sounds properly like us. You immediately know that he's just a bad dude, and you don't want to deal with him. Okay, let's go ahead and jump back into painting. We're going to go and bring Reaper Olive Skin, and we're going to continue with these different leather parts. So we have a kind of like shadowy figure that can be involved in some supernatural badness. He can just be a purely human bad guy. But now he has a big threat to his power through the form of this red mist returning. And I'm going to assume that the player characters are not going to be on his good side, because they got sent to go ahead and take care of this, and they came back empty-handed. So socially, there you go. Politically, the Lord of Benevolence is the head man in charge, or head woman in charge, head person in charge. So we're getting a real good idea of how the Red Mist Valley is looking. And it does not look like a nice place, but it looks like a place rife with adventure. So politically, the Lord of Benevolence is the one in charge. Economically, clearly, they go ahead and sell this magical elemental earth and ship it out to lands far away. And they probably import everything that would be needed to run a city. There's probably some form of agriculture nearby. It's really difficult for anywhere to survive without some form of agriculture nearby, on account of the fact that people got to eat. But I would assume that the more luxury goods and Epicurean delights are in high demand, and they're traded from this elemental earth. So that's economically. Religion and culture. This is when you can really start playing around, because now you're not thinking about one thing, religion and culture. You're thinking about a good-sized town. And when I say town, like I want to be like this central area. If this is a particularly isolated spot, then go ahead and think of like maybe 2,000-3,000 permanent residents inside this town. It's like a small walled city, like an oasis in the middle of the desert. It sounds like my fiance is moving from Just Dance into watching a movie of some sort. So I can hear very, very faintly. If you guys can hear that, by the way, just let me know and I'll ask her to turn it down. So we've got the water merchants. We've got their source of power. We already know that there is a priest of the Lawbringer as one of the gods, the main god. And we'll go and say that the Lawbringer is the main god of this area. I mean, it is a harsh area, and this is an area that was settled and probably had to fight to survive. The law can be very, very harsh. And it seems like a place where tough people live. So let's go and say that the main religion and the main temple is the Temple of the Lawbringer. But there's going to be others too. You got 2,000 people, so let's go ahead and bring out other thing. By the way, this is most D&D pantheons are what are referred to as henotheistic or polytheistic. Henotheism is when you have a religion that recognizes and acknowledges the presence of multiple gods, but only worships one. A lot of people think of that's monotheistic. Monotheism is something actually a little bit different. Monotheism is the belief that there is only one God and other gods are just manifestations of that one God. It's a little bit more complicated and it's a much more recent concept. But we'll go with the henotheistic, polytheistic assumption because this is D&D and that's just kind of what the assumption is in D&D. And it works. So, you've got like, he's got like a face mask. All right, chat, face mask on these polar bears. Is that metal or is that leather? So there's probably going to be some other gods, and this is a good place for you to go and start kind of injecting more of your own flavor. And don't just think of like the religious aspect of it. Think about the cultural aspect of it. What are the holy observances? I mean, if most things are based around the concept of following the law and a harsh law, then a lot of things are going to wind up coming out from that. People are generally going to be rather dour, but that also means that they're going to be very traditionalist, which means they're going to take their traditions very seriously. And now you got to start figuring out what these traditions are. This is a good idea. This is a good time to start thinking of how old this town is, how long this place has been here, and how long this elemental earth has been getting mined out of the ground and put in the hands of wizards far away. So they probably have holidays, and their holidays are probably very rigidly enforced. Maybe not like days off of work, because that doesn't quite seem like these guys' shtick, but definitely various observances. Maybe like maybe there's some dietary restrictions. Dietary restrictions are always fun. Maybe some things where it's like you're not allowed to eat this. Why? Because you're not allowed to. Now there's always a reason for why, but maybe that reason has been lost to the ages. Maybe they go through periods of fasting. That's very common in religions, is periods where you're just not supposed to eat. Maybe they have developed a taste for that magical moonshine. And it's a little bit difficult to get a hold of because the only people who know how to make it are back in that mining village. But this is a good opportunity to go ahead and think of some of the different things that would basically just make this place a little bit different culturally than some of the other places your PCs may have been to. I like holidays. I like festivals. I like the idea of things like when you arrive there, got Sanctum Seraph, leather with possible metal clasps. I'm not familiar with the model range. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering because there's like it looks like there's a lot of metal on these guys, like almost like there's barding on the polar bear, which is really cool to begin with. And actually, speaking of which, we're going to go ahead and step away from what we're doing because it looks like Yeah, it looks like they are dry enough to do this. We are going to go and hop back to the polished bone. We're going to go ahead and dry brush over these polar bears. Yeah, by the way, Sanctum Seraph, I know. Thank you for engaging in the chat. It definitely helps. If you have not checked out the Epic Encounters line by Steamforged Games, please do. They actually shared my link to my stream today, which I was really thankful for. They're good people over there. Looks like we still got a good chunk of people who have joined in. So I'm happy to have all of you here. So we're gonna go ahead and grab Crappy Brush, scrape most of the paint off in my tissue or my paper towel, as the case is. Let's go ahead and just dry brush this area for the polar bear. Now we got a decent area that we're building up, so we want to build it up slowly. This is a technique where slow is better than fast. You want to build this up gradually. See, and now it looks a lot more like polar bear. And we're going to get that without getting too much on the rest of the model. All right, so right here, you could say that there's a festival, some sort of dietary thing. Like maybe like on the holy days, they if water is the source of power here, then probably water deprivation would be the big thing that they would do to observe. And I don't doubt that the Lord of Benevolence would probably kind of support that as a method of stretching his own resources. So we'll go ahead and say that they'll say on the day before their holy day, like whatever we'll say like if they worship on a Sunday, then the lead up to it, they don't drink any water. Which means that you are going to have people who are not going to be very happy and they're going to be very upset of being in the desert and not drinking any water on Saturdays. Or maybe they're very limited to the amount of water they can drink. And on top of that, because this is a culture like where it has almost like a state religion, that could actually be enforced under by the law. Which, right then, will give all manner of examples of what happens when you see the Lord of Benevolence behind closed doors breaking his own law. Now, he's always nice and flush, or people constantly looking for a loophole because people do that. So maybe that's one of the reasons why this Earth Spirit Moonshine is so popular, is because it's not water, but it will still kind of sustain you, even though it is alcohol. So on the Saturdays before the holy day, people can drink that. They just can't drink the water. All right, so now we got a little bit more cultural stuff, and because this is a big town, I recommend having like maybe 3 or 4 things. And this, because it's not a small village, this is a good time to go ahead and bring into that world building question. What do these people do with their trash? Do they hide it? Do they bury it? Do they have a general dump? Do they just dump it in the street? Let other people handle it. This doesn't seem like a place where they would just dump in the street and let other people handle it. It seems like one of the advantages of there being such an orderly and law-driven society is that they probably have a pretty decent amount of infrastructure. I'm assuming the public works of the Lord of Benevolence. I'm assuming he puts a little bit of an effort on public works to go and keep these people out of open revolt, and he seems like a guy with a rather orderly mind. So let's go and say that they do have a waste removal system for whatever they consider to be trash. And they have a landfill out of town. Now, of course, because this is a fantasy setting, that landfill is going to be filled with monsters and scavengers. And if you're playing D&D, this is where you get your carrion crawlers, your Otyugs, probably some Onkegs in there or a variant of Onkeg. And you can get all sorts of slime and all sorts of nasty, nasty dungeon-dwelling monsters over there. And of course, the player characters have to go there at some point to find something. And they have to deal with all of these, like, the crap that's outside of here, just kind of being tossed into a landfill a couple miles outside of town, downwind of it. because there's no way on Earth this stuff would survive if it was upwind. Which brings up another idea. Who lives downwind of this? I'll leave that to your interpretation and ideas. So, we are at that is the religious. That's kind of like the cultural thing. We've got a religious tradition. They have a taste for the moonshine made by the mining camp. And then finally, militarily, how are the laws enforced and how are they protected from? Excuse me. How are they protected from bandits, interlopers, and the like? Well, we got another somebody else popping on. Another TT viewer. Thank you for another TTV viewer. Thank you for joining us. We are painting some miniatures. We're talking world building, and we're kind of almost making a D&D campaign setting right here. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Engage in the chat. I'm taking as much from the chat as I can. So you can go ahead and have the Lord's Guard, which probably answer to him more than anything else. You know, the City Watch, local militia. Although I get the idea that these guys would be a little bit more than local militia. I get the idea that you'd actually have professional soldiers here. Yeah, that sounds like a good little. That sounds like a good beginning. That sounds like a good. You could get some serious adventures out of here. Now, one thing that would probably also be happening, considering how big of a deal water is, I doubt it would be a threat to the water merchant and the Lord of Benevolence's power. But if people are trying to get all the water that they can, and water is power and water is effectively money in this place, then you're going to get people trying to gather it in every possible way. And you can have all sorts of crazy fantasy here. Like, could you imagine a wizard with a create water spell in this place? They would literally be a license to print money. So my money on that would be that Lord of Benevolence would probably do everything within his power to stop that magic from existing. But let's not take a look at the magic. Let's go and take a look at just the normal everyday people. What would they be able to do? You're going to get people who are going to be coming up with all sorts of crazy crap trying to do it to conserve water as well as to go ahead and harvest it from the area. I can pretty well promise you that somebody is going to be trying to figure out how to filter out water, how to filter out the impurities and let people drink pee. That's going to happen. There's probably a strong culture of conservation of water happening here, which means that most everybody's walking around perpetually dehydrated. Probably a lot of people are going to be sitting in shade a lot. There's going to be a lot of shade to help keep people out of the sunlight so they don't sweat as much. Which, if there's so much shade around, that immediately starts giving us some ideas, some architecture. Now I'm starting to see this place as they're going to be building out of whatever's in the area, and they're in a desert, so earth and clay is available, very readily available. Wood is not. So probably there's going to be a lot of like textile awnings, and probably most of the throughways are actually going to be covered in some way, shape, or form to go ahead and kind of filter some of the sunlight to try to keep the place cool. They're probably going to try to keep the place ventilated too. So I'm expecting lots of big open windows to try to let as much of that desert wind through as they can. But at the same time, this stuff has to be able to close down because the desert also gets brutally cold at night. So I would expect that there would be a lot of work with furs and textiles and probably a thriving textile trade in this place too. So I hope now just being able to do this and do this thought experiment of world building, I hope you guys are starting to see how I kind of view this stuff to make it make this stuff feel more real. Because I think that, like, as we talk about this, the more this place starts feeling more and more real, and the Red Mist Valley starts feeling more like a real place that people can adventure in, and then a lot of stuff's going to start answering them. Like, is this the only mine where this stuff can come out? Oh, that's a really good question, and people are naturally going to want to ask that. Are there other mines like this? Are there other places where this stuff is being extracted from the ground? Well, in all due likelihood, yes. That's probably the entire reason for this place. Oh. Scotch. So now, at some point, your PCs are probably going to want to head out and do a different direction and check out another one of these camps to see if this is happening there too. Well, you've already got a framework to build off of because you've got that previous one. Let's go and think about what another one could be. Use the same template, but vary it up a little bit. Make it a different place. Make it culturally different. And go ahead and think that if the one that's there is now starting to change a little bit because there's that new priest of the lawbringer who views the law as being about justice as much as it is about order, maybe you can go ahead and run into an area where that's not the case, where it's still very much traditionalist, or even the people who are working there are volunteers. Maybe you run into one that it's a forced labor camp. Because especially if there is a culture of frugality and waste not, want not about this place, I get the idea that a lot of criminals are going to wind up having to work the mines until they die. Because that is the kind of brutal place that the Red Mist Valley appears to be. Use that same template, but vary it a little bit, and you can go ahead and populate another maybe 4 or 5 mining camps to support this town. And this is when it's time to start fleshing out your map. Now, I recommend before this you have a general map of the area, and when I say general map, I mean go ahead and get a piece of graph paper, make a map at the start of the campaign, like when you're starting your world building, and do 10 minutes on this map. I'm talking have a rough shape where your mining camp is, where the big city is, maybe dot a couple of things, have your major topographical features, mountains to the north, mountains to the south. Everything else you're going to come up with as you go. All right, so it looks like we got a couple more people joining us. Hello, Silly Gnome 225 and Thicker. Welcome to my channel. We are painting minis. We are chatting tabletop role-playing games. In this case, we are talking about world building and showing a bottom-up approach and how starting with a town instead of a big old world map might be a better idea. So right now, the way we described it, at this point, you probably had, if your player characters are getting to the point where they're actually heading out and trying to explore the greater world, after they've gotten the basic hook of this campaign, you've probably gotten probably 6 or 7 sessions in. So you've had, assuming you meet once a week, you've had 6 or 7 weeks to start fleshing out this world, just almost like in concentric circles going out. And just try to get the player characters, and go ahead and you can talk to them about this and tell them that this is how you're doing it, and get them to, if they're planning on going out somewhere, have them tell you the week before, so you know what you need to build and what you need to prepare. It may seem for a while like you're just kind of, like I said before, building the plane in midair, but once you get used to it and once you get practice with it, this stuff moves surprisingly well, and you can get some really, really good world building that is all going to be the stuff you'll use. One of the problems you can run into with world building is that world building has a habit of being in a situation where 90% of it is never used. You can come up with this whole complicated, beautiful world, and the PCs will never interact with any of it. And it's all just background noise. So now that we've gone over some basics, the concept of bottom-up world building, inside-out storytelling. All right, what color are your bows? Now that we've gone over that, let's go and just start talking about just kind of other aspects of doing this with world building to just help you make this place feel a lot better. And things you can use. One of the biggest things that you can do to make it feel like a real place is to go ahead and present the idea that this place is not a vacuum. This world, this area does not exist in a vacuum. Have elements of the bigger world pop in, and as you go, you can start coming up with ideas for this bigger world. And this is a good time to start tapping your players to go and have them come up with stuff if they want to. Find out where they come from and bring in aspects of their homeland into this area. I mean, it's kind of like a traveler's area, so maybe have somebody from their homeland celebrating a holiday that they did that doesn't get celebrated out here. Maybe if you have a cleric who is of a god that's outside the lawmaker, maybe one of the lesser known ones, go ahead and introduce a couple of followers to them who recognize your holy symbol. Are like, oh my god, we haven't seen a priest in so long. Can we, have a service and that kind of stuff, or do any sort of that, or do that type of thing. Bringing that kind of stuff into it will go ahead and increase your player characters and your players' buy-in to the world, as well as their idea of what this world is. Plus, it lets them introduce some stuff, which is always good. I know this is one of the things that I love in Savage Worlds, that they have the interludes system, where whenever there's a little bit of downtime, you can go and draw a card for what type of interlude, and if people do a little kind of like a downtime scene, they can go ahead and get free bennies, which I think is also great because first off, it gives people bennies, and I like it when people have a lot of bennies in Savage Worlds. But also, this is a perfect example for you to start having them working on world building stuff, and you can just go ahead and write down all those little details that they come up with on the fly and just incorporate them. Takes a lot of time and effort off of you, and allows you to focus on just weaving your story and telling your adventure. So, all right. So the other thing that I'd like to bring up in world building, and this is something that I know Matt Colville talks about. Which, by the way, if you there's a couple of resources that I would recommend taking a look at. Matt Colville on YouTube has a fantastic channel all about running D&D and tabletop role-playing games. He's got some fantastic advice. It's entertaining. It's really worth watching. The other one is there's another YouTube channel called Hello Future Me, where this guy does just world building advice, and there's fantastic stuff that he comes up with, and I recommend looking at it. Like he has an entire section on he has an entire video, like a 2-3 hour video on how names are made, because places get named in specific ways, and it's not the type of thing. It's not like people just decide this is the name of this place. That's not how that works. All right, so we got that. What do we need to do left on these guys? We need metal, we need hair, and we need the frills. Okay, let's go start on the metal. All right, so we got Reaper Shadowed Steel. All right, so one of the things that Matt Colville talks about, and something that I highly agree with and I recommend people think about, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable take at times, But go ahead and ask, if you have a kingdom that you set your game in, is it currently at war? And if it is not, why is it not? This kind of starts jumping into a little bit of history. But if you observe history, this idea that we have right now, where the world is generally at peace, is an extremely new concept. This is purely post World War II, to the point where a lot of historians are referring to this time frame as the new peace. Historically speaking, war was very profitable toward the people in charge, and they would wage war for really no other reason than to be able to wage war. Most medieval kingdoms, in some way, shape, or form, were perpetually at war with somebody. They were always fighting their neighbors or people further down the road. It was just kind of the nature of the beast. It's what they would always be doing. So if you don't have a war happening, it's more interesting to ask, why is there no war happening, than why is there war happening? Go ahead and think about a story and the idea of conflict and tension being the default. Having the default be that there is a war happening just naturally winds up adding to this conflict and tension. Adds to a background, and your player characters don't have to be actively participating in the war, but the idea that there are soldiers garrisoned everywhere. Man, these are some heavily armored bears. Did not realize how much metal they had on them until I started actually working on it. Yeah, there can be soldiers garrisoned pretty much everywhere. There can be, while you're just traveling, you can come along recent battlefields. You can come along marching soldiers on both sides of the war who may or may not waylay your characters. That provides a very fertile ground for adventure and for conflict and tension. But you can also have a situation where just the kingdom is not at war, and it is a very, very tense peace. Peace tends to be very tense, by the way. And think, who is keeping the place from being at war? There was a long time where, before World War I, it's believed that Otto von Bismarck probably delayed World War I by about 20-25 years because he was constantly maintaining a delicate balance of power between the different Austrian nations. Which is a really interesting concept, the idea that is just one guy literally keeping this place peaceful through his pure will and political acumen. So that's one thing you can do. You can do that. There is maybe some sort of a religion or something supernatural happening, where maybe you can run it like there was just some sort of great war like World War II that was so great and so cataclysmic that pretty much everybody just lost their taste for it. That's one of the things that happened in World War II, is that everybody saw the war. War wasn't on a distant battlefield. It was in everybody's backyard. Even the people like in the United States, like the United States was attacked by Japan. They saw firsthand the horrors of war. So maybe you can adapt that kind of post-World War II thought frame, that maybe people are trying for peace because they don't want to deal with the war anymore. And that assumes that even though the technology level and society level may be more medieval, maybe they have a little bit more of a modern outlook. Or hell, there's nothing stopping you from doing a setting that is still sword and sorcery fantasy, but basically takes place in the 50s. You can do a orcs and elves and magic and stuff, along with baby boom era muscle cars and like World War II vets all over the place, kind of rebuilding in a economic boom. Nothing stopping you from doing that. I've played in a game like that. It was a lot of fun. So another thing you may want to do is, when you're sitting there talking about these wars, really think about why they're being caused, with the understanding that in real life, most war is caused over resources and land. Most of it. regardless of what people say, the idea of a just versus unjust war, almost all of it is for resources and land. But that's not necessarily what the people who are fighting the war will say. Politics can get very complicated. Those are all things you can incorporate into your game. Man, I really should have painted these guys before putting them on their bases. All right, so here is what we have now. For those who are still watching, we got a whole bunch of metal on this polar bear. We're getting pretty close to being able to put some washes on these guys. I think we maybe only got 1 or 2 more paint steps after this metal. Still not entirely sure if I'm going to be able to finish these guys tonight, but I'm going to try. So yeah. So I find that bottom-up world building tends to lend itself very well towards tabletop RPGs, mostly because it's a very functional way of doing it. It's very functional and helps you not just waste a ton of time doing stuff that you're not really paying attention to and that you're not going to use. There's no reason to design a final dungeon until a level or 2 before your characters get there. You can have a general idea of it, and you can tease stuff, and you can have stuff be mysterious, but you don't need to really get much more beyond that. Now, I've been DMing for a while now, so I do tend to do, when I'm doing my prep initially and doing like building a setting, I tend to do a little bit more than just the initial village and then work from there. That's kind of like the bare minimum and the ideal way of doing it. I tend to go ahead and start on a region, but I still keep it very localized. I'll go and try to keep the regional powers and keep it just get a general idea of who populates this area and where the main like power structures are. Getting butterfingers. But one of the exceptions to this is if you are planning on playing a game where you have to design a magic system. Now, most games, they already have this built out for you, so it's not necessarily an issue. But if you want to say that magic works a little bit differently than it does in most D&D worlds, that is something that you do kind of need to have out in the front so that people will be able to understand that when they make their characters, especially if they play a magic user. Like I know Dark Sun leads with how their magic is different. And that's a good thing to lead with. So I do think talking about this, I want to go ahead and revise that dwarf setting I was making. I was having a lot of fun doing the game design work on it as well as the world building. I'd started out the entire thing with this idea that really taking dwarven society and digging into it and fleshing it out into a full grown culture of the kingdom under the mountain, even based upon figured out like what do dwarves value as virtues, and what would they consider virtues and what would they consider vices. Because I tried to keep everything very cultural, and I kind of based everything off of that. So if people are interested in hearing more about that, I'll be glad to talk about it, but I'm not going to go and gunk up your ears unless people want to hear it. I'd still love to run that game, though. Maybe when Savage Worlds Pathfinder comes out, I'll go ahead and do a little bit more conversion and run it in that. Speaking of which, they are almost $300,000. I'm happy for them. Looking forward to getting my stuff is due in September for the print products. So much metal. I will go and say that these are probably not probably, these are definitely my favorite models in this particular set. It's kind of like the kobold set has these kobolds riding these fire snakes, and the goblin set has goblins riding giant tree frogs, and I think those are the coolest models in those sets too. Think of just like cavalry. But yeah, so if you're engaging in world building, really most of it winds up being asking why. Why is this like this? And then figuring out extrapolations based on the answers to those questions. I think I'm going to have to take a short break, a little bit earlier than normal, to grab myself another drink and stretch my legs. These guys are taking a little bit more focus than I have right now. So I will be right back, and I will see you back soon. All right, we are back. When I got another drink, stretched my legs, got more parchment paper for my wet palette. That's one of the downsides about using a wet palette is that you do have to periodically replace the parchment paper because it'll start curling and whatnot. All right, so we need more shadowed steel. Where are you? It's blade steel. Shadowed steel, there you are. So did I get the no, I got just a little bit of metal here. So largely painting wise, what we're doing now is we're just trying to make sure that all of the primer is covered. And we may have to go back and touch up on some spots, but that is the main goal right now. This is also one of the reasons why I prefer doing black primer over white, is that in the event that I miss a little bit with black, it's usually further in, so it just looks like more shadows. But with white, all of those mistakes are on center display, and believe me, there are a lot more of them than most people than you would generally care to admit. So yeah, I do like talking world building. I do enjoy doing it. A lot of it's just thought experiment, but a lot of it can also be very practical if you're running games and whatnot. And there are a lot of good resources for it online. Just my big thing is that bottom up versus that top down, where I know plenty of people who will just start at the top with their world map and their major powers and their ancient history and fallen civilizations and their gods and creation myths and all that stuff. And for the most part, that stuff never actually affects your campaign. Most campaigns, especially, they start out. Well, most campaigns die off before they hit level 5 anyway. But most campaigns, they start small, they start very localized, and things tend to be a lot more intimate and a lot. They affect your players more if they're personal. Like you can have this great big epic world-spanning event, but if you wind up having it be that the relationship between the characters and the villains are much more personal, your character's going to care a lot more. That's just kind of storytelling in general. Try to keep the stakes very intimate and personal. You'll wind up hooking people because it winds up being more relatable. All right. And like most of these guys, as I start painting them, I get a lot more in the way of experience, and just the paint starts moving faster. It's going to be a lot more metal on these guys than there were on the orcs on foot. It's not a problem. I like having a little bit of variation. I'm a little bit surprised that they gave them bows, though. Didn't have them, like, riding with great big axes or having their spears at the ready. I mean, from a little bit of like a more realistic, logical perspective, it would make sense for orcs to be using a lot of bows, just because bows require a lot more strength than most people realize, especially people who play D&D and whatnot, where the more weight you can put behind that draw, the faster, farther, and more accurately that projectile will go. So, well, I know a lot of people traditionally elves have bows. Really, the stronger species, like orcs, would be deadly with bows designed for them. And if you had a giant who had a bow that was giant size, so that thing would be flinging a log of wood speed of sound over a mile with just put giant holes in things. Right, we're about 2 hours in. I'm actually starting to think I'll be able to get these guys done tonight. Considering that I'm just about done with the base coat and then I just got to put on the washes. Although I don't know if the artist is going to be able to hold up. I'm getting a lot more tired than I normally am. As much as I hate the idea of having to finish these guys off camera, I'm really trying to go ahead and maintain a continuity on this set. Trying to get the whole thing done on camera just so everybody can see exactly how much time I'm taking on it. Kind of present it as that workflow thing. Workflow, speed painting, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Yeah, well, checking my viewers list, it looks like Lemon Juices 12 has joined us. So you are welcome to say hello in the chat. Ask any questions you want. I know a lot of this is going to be posted up in YouTube. Me rambling on about different RPG stuff as well as painting and how I'm doing it. I'd also appreciate any feedback on the camera. It is a little bit closer this time. So hopefully you guys can go ahead and make out the detail of what I'm painting a little bit more too. It's going to be a work in progress for a while. I'm still kind of figuring out a lot of this stuff. I'm not exactly a AV whiz kid or anything like that. Yeah, I'm talking a lot less. I can feel myself losing steam tonight. It's the only downside about doing these regular broadcasts is kind of committing yourself to going and painting for a couple hours on a night a week. I normally try to get a little bit of painting done every day in some way, shape, or form, but that's the problem is sometimes it's just You only want to paint for a little bit. But I'm at least going to get these base coats and washes done. See if I feel a little bit more energized after that. Let's get the spearhead. So, taking a look at this guy, looks like I missed a little bit of that gray. So let's go ahead and pull out the wolf gray wherever I put it. Tempest gray, sorry. All right, so. All right, it looks like we have more viewers. So for those of you just joining, this is Party Bear Miniatures party stream, just doing some painting. Enjoying some fun, chatting some RPGs, mostly me rambling. You are welcome to chime in. I know I'm going to post this on, you can watch this video on demand, or I'll post this on YouTube after we're done, talking about bottom-up world building as opposed to top-down world building. And the merits of doing it bottom-up instead of top-down. Let's go and paint these bedrolls on them gray as well. Go ahead and mix it up a little bit. Now, I know on all the other guys, I did all the trim on the boots and whatnot. The fur trim, I did it in the off-white like it's polar bear fur. But this guy actually has, these guys actually have a trim around the saddle for the bear. And I don't want to do it the same color as the polar bear itself, so we're going to go and do that in this gray. So that way you can actually almost like we'll create like a line between the two of them. Also because I'm going to shade the gray with the black, as well as the metallic is going to get shaded with the black. So that'll also save me a little bit of time jumping from one to another. So we've got a couple different spots here also that are going to be leather straps as opposed to metal. So I'm going to have to jump back over to a brown as well. Well, I hope everybody is getting a lot of painting done. I mean, if I can wind up inspiring just people to do a little bit more painting, get one more person to go ahead and not see this as being super intimidating, I'll consider it a mission accomplished. Dude. I think my next big goal for the stream is to figure out how to have some background music on. Just go ahead and make it not feel so silent when I run out of steam talking. And I think I'm just going to use the paint I have on my palette, and I'm going to have to call it for the night. I'm starting to get a headache. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think unfortunately, guys, I'm going to have to call it for the night. As much as I enjoy doing this, I'm starting to get a bit of a headache, and don't think sitting here being hunched over my painting station is really helping all that much. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll go ahead and try to do a bonus stream, or at least have a YouTube, or at least put on YouTube where I can finish these guys up. There's not that much work left to do on them. but should be able to put them up with the rest of them by the end of the weekend at the least while I finish a commission. So in the meantime, you guys enjoy yourselves, keep painting, and as always, go ahead and follow me, like and subscribe on YouTube, like my page, Party Bear Studios, and if you're interested in more minis painting, join the Dungeons & Dragons Miniatures Painting Group on Facebook. For now, this is Party Bear Minis signing off. Be good to each other.